welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and here with video on YouTube. And as you can see, this week I am joined by my beautiful wife, Melissa. Say hi.
Hello.
So this week we're doing something a little different on my podcast. Usually I'll pick some topic or I'll interview some person, and if it's a topic that I'm talking about, I might go on at a mad rate for half an hour or something about it and pontificate about this or that or the other thing and give some opinions and give some ideas and, just basically blather on. But this week I thought, sometimes I have the most interesting conversations with the person who's living with me. We actually sit right here and on this couch, and we talk about all kinds of stuff. And, sometimes we're in altered states of consciousness when we do that. But generally speaking, we have a good time. And so I thought rather than bring a guest on this week or pontificate all by myself, I would try to pontificate with somebody else. And what we're going to be talking about this week are rights. And this is something that's kind of an evergreen topic. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's ever a settled topic, that's for sure. We're talking about human rights, civil liberties, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is a big topic, and it concerns literally all of us. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I thought start off with this. Actually, something happened that was a little alarming to me earlier this year, and I kind of noted it in the spectrum of crazy things that are going on these days, and have always gone on. I mean, let's be honest. There's never a time when there's no need for complaint,
right,
or argument.
Never in history has that been true.
Exactly. And everybody always thinks they're living in the worst of times, mm-hmm. and always is hyper aware of all of the individual problems and situations and political minutia and job and environment and education and all the things that we're aware of that kind of plague us and our kids and our parents and our thises and our that's and our dog and our cat. There's always something to complain about. But anyway, in terms of this administration, it's been a little bit of a wild ride. I think we can all agree that life in America has been a little tumultuous over the last 2 years, and no matter what side of the fence you're on. This move at first, like I said, alarmed me. I looked into it a little bit. I'm not going to pontificate on it for a long time, but I thought it might be a good place to start with this conversation. And that was on June 19th, the Trump administration withdrew from the United Nations Human Rights Council in protest of what it perceives as an entrenched bias against Israel and a willingness to allow notorious human rights abusers as members. UN Ambassador Nikki Haley, who has sought major changes on the council throughout her tenure, issued a blistering critique of the panel, saying it had grown more callous over the past year and become a protector, quote, a protector of human rights abusers and a cesspool of political bias, end quote. She cited the admission of Congo as a member, even as mass graves were being discovered there, and the failure to address human rights abuses in Venezuela and Iran. So, and she's not wrong in citing those things. I imagine that, if life in our Congress is as contentious as we seem to get the idea that it is.
Yeah.
What must it be like for member nations, for ambassadors and representatives of countries all over the world?
That's got to be,
a
fascinating thing to watch.
I would imagine so. And there are, when you're on the world stage and you have all these different countries coming together, these are not people who come to the table with America's best interests in mind.
No.
Or anybody else's best interests in mind except their own.
Yeah, like everybody, me.
Yeah, basically. I don't really see any reason why it would be any different. Mm-hmm. I don't want to make wild assumptions, and I'm not actually ragging on the United Nations as a body. I don't know. I mean, what were you raised thinking the UN was, and how we should look at it.
Yeah, I always thought it was like, they're the peacekeepers, they're the ones that make sure everyone's behaving around the world and all that kind of stuff, and they're the ones that try to keep people from going to war and stuff like that, or if there's going to be a war, you got to get it through them first. And
yeah, I'm not actually sure what the full powers of that are. Like I said, I didn't do a whole lot of research before sitting down on this. I kind of wanted to just sort of roll it. But the thing I'm most familiar with United Nations is L. Ron Hubbard ragging on it. And he was very anti-one world government. And he was very much into, nations and nationalism and America. And that's, that was just his take on things. So that was my take on things for a long time because of that. And our cat is walking through the frame here. You can't see him because he's underneath the camera frame, but he just strolled on by. So, but at the same time, later in my Scientology career, I think in the late 90s or 2000s, it was in the 2000s actually, we started becoming active in the idea of human rights, and Youth for Human Rights became a sort of a thing in Scientology. In fact, if anybody's watched my interview that I just posted this last week here with Jeff Levin, he talked about the song that he wrote or got written for that United Nations human rights campaign that Scientology sort of put forward. And it was all about educating youth on human rights. And the fact of the matter is, it's probably the only front group, I'll say, for Scientology that actually is doing something truly decent. Because they put together public service announcements and information about each article of the United Nations, or the Universal Declaration, I should say, of Human Rights, which Eleanor Roosevelt was instrumental in putting together after World War II and kind of getting pushed through the United Nations. So they took all those points, I think there's 25 or so articles, and made a little 30-second, 1-minute public service announcements demonstrating each one for kids using very real-world examples. So I'll actually promote that, because it doesn't have any Scientology content in it, really. It's just about human rights, and it does a good job of educating on that topic. The irony, of course, and the duplicity there is that it's Scientology that is putting that out. One of the biggest violators of human rights in the United States. So, I won't endorse Scientology's end of that, but I will endorse the human rights end of it. Put it that way. Anyway, so yeah, I think the United Nations certainly has a job to do there, and I don't have right now a position on Israel. I don't really know. I haven't determined yet for myself what to think about that, or what side to take, or something like that. Yeah. I know it's contentious. I know a lot of people have some very strong opinions about it. So I just wanted to put out there, I don't know. I have a lot of Jewish friends who've been to Israel, who even come from Israel. I don't have anything against any of them personally. Yeah. I don't know. Right.
Well, I mean, I don't think you can be against people that are like citizens of Israel. It's the government that's doing all these things that are kind of awful, but it's awful on the other side too. So that's kind of, they're both doing really awful things, and no one is innocent, so that's what always bothers me, is the idea that one of them is more innocent than the other, and I'm like, not really.
Yeah, it's a highly charged, highly contentious thing, and people obviously are killing each other over it. So, we're not going to solve that problem as we sit here on the couch right now. But I just wanted to make it clear that I don't have a stake in that one way or the other, because I haven't done a deep enough dive into that, and I'm actually in the process now of learning a lot about the Middle East and about Islam, so that I can actually start talking about that and the extremism that exists there. But I'm not going to open my mouth about it until I am educated enough to feel that I'm certain about what I'm talking about.
Right.
But as far as human rights goes, yeah, there's no question that there have been human rights violations on both ends of that conflict, the Israeli side and the Palestinian side.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so I'm, you know, I will certainly say that while I might not choose a side, I am certainly on the side of, hey, can't we at least stop violating each other's human rights in some fashion? At least the most blatant human rights violations, you know, like killing kids. I don't think that's particularly justified. I'll say that. So as far as the United States position goes in withdrawing from the UN Council, I get the point. Nikki Haley went out of her way when making this statement to be clear about the fact that this was not a matter of the United States not endorsing or backing up human rights or wanting human rights to be a thing. Of course, we have our own issues with human rights violations here in the States with the, you know, sort of systemic racism that without any question it exists. How much it exists, to what degree, I think is different in different geographical areas.
Sure.
I think, and different, you know, depending on which police officer you run into on which particular night, or what area of the country you're in, like I said, or what state you're in. You know, it matters. And of course, there's the whole situation at our border,
right?
Which is clearly not a great situation.
Yeah, I mean, separating kids. I mean, that's not okay what they're doing down there.
No, it's really not, and it's got a very long and very ugly history. I was actually going to do a whole podcast on that, but it became so long and so contentious trying to figure it all out. I just was like, oh my God. I realize that there's some things if I can't do it justice, it's probably best to just not talk about it. You know, I might have an opinion that I might state about things. For example, I don't think separating families at the border is particularly a very productive or constructive or good idea. I don't particularly agree with the Trump administration's assessment of the situation down there. But I also know from having heard from people down at the border that there's a lot of false framing and false information also about what goes on down there. So, which is not to say that kids are not being separated from their families. I'm not asserting that. We know that's happening. We know that was done on purpose. We know it was done on purpose in order to make illegal immigration so horrible that people wouldn't do it. That was the thinking. It's faulty logic, because when people are running for their lives to the United States, they're going to keep running no matter what kind of barrier you put up there, because it's certain death where they're coming from, or at least that's how they feel about it. Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's ugly.
It's very ugly. And I think it's hard for people to really grasp how scary the situation is in places in Mexico and South America. I don't think they get that.
I don't either. And I don't think also they quite grasp the personal struggle of immigrants coming in desperation, and refugees coming in desperation into the United States. And by the way, I mentioned the thing about the Trump administration, but just to be totally candid and clear, it's not like all this started with Trump.
Right.
We go back decades to human rights abuses in Latin America, South American countries, border issues. I mean, we're reaping what we've sown in a number of ways with what's going on down there. So I'm not saying that it's just the Trump administration. What I'm basically saying when I say that is that the Trump administration hasn't done anything constructive to change the whirlwind that we're sort of reaping, from our earlier administrative action.
Right. It's just, it was there, but now it's escalating.
Exactly. Okay, now in terms of rights, getting back to human rights, I made a few notes, and first off, just to kind of define the term, you know, it's kind of interesting when you start looking into this, because I've done this in the past as well as just a skim now, how contentious just trying to define what a right is and what a human right is, and amongst different cultures and, you know, countries, and with vastly different backgrounds and incredibly different value systems.
Right.
You know, a right.
We can't even figure it out in our own country.
Well,
We
that's
can't even.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it is a little bit, you know, hypocritical for us to be pontificating about human rights or try to be the world police when, you know, we're doing some of the stuff we're doing. We could certainly use with a little bit more cleaning up of our house, I'll say. First off, just the word right, okay? A moral or legal entitlement to have or obtain something or act in a certain way. Okay? Moral or legal entitlement to have or obtain something or act in a certain way. So immediately, you can see the problems that this definition poses.
Right.
Because if you're talking about a moral entitlement, well, your morals are different from mine.
Yep.
Right? Whether it's because of your religion. I mean, Islamic morals are radically different from Christian morality, from Jewish morality, from atheist morality. These are, you know, you'd think everybody thinks killing somebody, for example, is a bad thing. Not really.
Yeah, there's some people that are fine with it.
Well, they're fine with it under different circumstances, and it's the difference in circumstances is what causes some of the problems. I mean, some people are, you know, I mean, in Islam you have the idea that maybe it's just among the extremists or the radicalists. I couldn't really say. I think it's a little broader than this. The idea that if you're violating God's law in some fashion, or you become an apostate, that you deserve death.
Yep.
Period. And that's just based on changing your mind or your belief about something.
Right. Or even in our own country with the death penalty, that's so contentious. You know, it's like, well, is that okay to kill someone because they killed somebody else or not? You know, and we can't seem to agree. No,
there's a lot of contention about that. I mean, personally, I'm not down with it. Probably, I mean, part of the reason I'm not is because we already know, statistically speaking and study-wise, that it doesn't reduce capital crime.
Nope.
You know, the threat of being killed, getting caught, getting sentenced to death, and then being killed, that threat doesn't stop anyone from killing somebody else or doing something that would be a capital offense. You know, here I've got the knife, I'm about to plunge it in you. Oh, wait, up, hang on.
Hold on, there's a death penalty.
Yeah, okay, I'm not going to do it today. You know, maybe I'll kill you tomorrow, but I got to think about this a little bit more. That doesn't happen. That scenario doesn't play out. So it's ineffective as a deterrent, and it's pretty barbaric. It's pretty brutal. Now, of course, passions run high. People experience a tragic loss. The families of victims who are, you know, left to suffer because some killer took out their kids or their spouse or whoever. I mean, it's not like I don't feel for those people or haven't experienced my own level of loss.
Right.
You know, and wanted to take it out on somebody. But my morality just kind of stops at that point of, okay, well, let's kill them. You know, to me, if you want someone to be rehabilitated, well, that's certainly not going to happen. If you want somebody to suffer for the rest of their life for what they did, well, then have them live for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, if you have, I think it'd be much worse. Personally, I think for me, it'd be much worse to live in a jail cell with no rights and everything for the rest of my life than to just, you know, be put out of my misery.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of punishment, I think that's a harsher punishment. And And of course, there's always the fact that people get wrongly accused and wrongly convicted. And we see we see instances or examples of people having DNA evidence or new evidence come to light, and we find out that they were wrongly convicted and they're sitting on death row when they shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. And the fact that, that has happened, that there have been people, I believe there's been a couple cases where people have been executed.
Right.
And then it was found out
they were innocent.
That they were innocent. And certainly even the possibility that could happen goes against the entire concept of our justice system. Mm-hmm. So.
And forensics isn't this perfect thing that we like to think it is either, because they make mistakes. Sometimes, things get fudged around, and it's not like it is on CSI,
Oh my God, not even close. We actually had a pretty interesting educational experience with forensic files, because we used to watch that all the time. Loved forensic files, because I was into the science of it. I thought it was fascinating. Right. And we found out.
Yeah, we found out that's not always as accurate as they portray it to be.
Some of those so-called fire pattern experts or arson experts, or some of the fingerprint analysis or the blood splatter analysis. Yep. We pretend, watch Dexter, and you pretend that this blood splatter thing is this exact science.
Right.
Not at all. And these guys are human, and they can make mistakes. And when you are relying on expert testimony only to find out that the guy is an expert in something that's actually kind of pseudoscience, and not, easily, when you have a situation where authorities, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes now, on the same topic can go into a court of law and give two completely contrary professional opinions on something, I'd say we probably have a field there that should be more rigorously researched and some more definitive answers found that cannot be invalidated, I guess, or we don't have one expert saying one thing and another expert saying the exact opposite, depending on which side of the plaintiff or, prosecution, whichever one they're on. I don't want to put somebody's life in the balance over something like that. So anyway, so we kind of found out that, that wasn't so great. But getting back to rights, that's just one thing, though. That's just one example of a moral predicament that causes a great deal of argument, and that's right on one of the first universal right, which is right to life.
Yep.
So anyway, and then in the definition of rights, it says a moral or legal entitlement. Oh my God! So when you're looking at an international perspective,
right. Different laws, different countries.
Totally. So, where we think, the law says that, you only cross the street when the light is blue, and over in, I don't know, Indonesia, they cross the light when the light's yellow or something. I don't know, I'm just being ridiculous. But, different laws and different reasons for the laws and different interpretations of the laws can make rights cloudy.
Right.
You think it's so clear. You think you really got it all figured out. And then somebody enters some curve, drives me nuts. So those two things alone, right at the beginning of the definition of rights, throw some real curves into the whole picture and make, have fuel debate, argument, endless numbers of academic papers and studies done on this stuff. And so we have, at the international level, we have the highest body is the United Nations Council on Human Rights, and all these countries coming together. And what do? They mainly pick on Israel.
Yep.
And that's fine. They should pick on Israel, I suppose. But what about Iran? What about us? What about Southeast Asia? I mean, what about the human rights violations that corporations are engaging in?
Exactly.
So there's a lot of issues to take up, and so I see the point in the U.S. going, we're out for a bit. But at the same time, I see the point, but I don't really think that was the best strategy. Nikki Haley sounded very frustrated on that whole thing. But you kind of see when you start diving into it why these contentious issues come to the fore, and why trying to get agreement on these things between different countries with different value systems, much less within one country, can just be a madhouse of argument. You know? Now, human rights, just to kind of drill down a little bit here, you'd think if there was one thing we should all agree on, human rights, a right believed to belong justifiably to every person.
No matter what.
That's right. Inalienable, unalterable, they cannot be taken away. Now, I wrote some stuff down here from the UN website, because, whether the council is dysfunctional or not, the theory of human rights as laid out on their website was some of the most sensible stuff I've found on the topic. So, I get the problems in implementing human rights, but at least codifying and talking about it seemed like a good source.
Right.
And it said that human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, whatever our nationality, place of residence, sex, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, language, or any other status. We are all equally entitled to our human rights without discrimination. These rights are all interrelated, interdependent, and indivisible. Universal human rights are often expressed and guaranteed by law in the forms of treaties, customary international law, general principles, and other sources of international law. International human rights law lays down obligations of governments to act in certain ways or to refrain from certain acts in order to promote and protect human rights and fundamental freedoms of individuals or groups. So it's, I think the idea here is that it's incumbent upon a government to protect its citizens' human rights. And I can see right away why, when you come down to the local level, things can get really difficult to sort out. We're going to get into civil rights and civil liberties after we touch on all these human rights. But, and I guess I'm jumping the gun a little bit getting into this, but, you have a group, for example, a minority group,
right,
that is being discriminated against. And they're very aware, very cognizant of their rights. And they tend to think that, or push in a direction that the group that's discriminated against them doesn't have the same rights because of the discrimination, right? I mean, just to make like an obvious case would be, oh boy, I might get in trouble for this one, but boy, I don't even know if I want to bring this one up. Actually, I'm just going to skip over that one. Okay, different one. Right to speech. You have the right to say whatever you want, but then if you say things that I disagree with, well, I want to take away your right to say things, but I'm going to do that by executing my right to say things. And we tend to, want to eclipse other people's rights because they're doing something we disagree with.
Right.
And then we don't realize when that happens, and this is my number one most fundamental argument on this, is we don't realize that by me eclipsing your rights, I'm actually eclipsing my own.
Yeah, you're opening the door for all kinds of stuff to happen, and it's like, you gotta, even if you disagree, they get to have their rights, because if they don't, you're gonna lose yours too.
I know, and it's rough. It gets really rough because I really don't like some of the things other people say.
Right. Me either. Like, are you serious?
Yeah, I mean, this whole Alex Jones thing.
Yeah.
That happened with him being removed from platforms. Well, nobody took away his rights.
Right,
But
right.
I'll tell you, there were people who interpreted that move as having taken away his rights. And there are other people who definitely do want to take away his rights.
Right, right.
I don't. I'm not interested in taking away the guy's right to speech.
Yeah, he do whatever he wants. He just has to face the consequences of when he does things that are outside of the protections of free speech, like libel and slander and all that kind of stuff.
That's exactly right. And that's where those rights exist, but then we find in the course of day-to-day living that we have to enact some laws and some regulations to maybe temper some of the ways that people abuse these things. But it becomes a morass. It can kind of become a slippery slope a little bit because you can regulate a right out of existence.
Right.
And you don't want to do that. But at the same time, you don't want people standing on a stage and inciting violence or getting behind a microphone and saying, well, these guys are just a bunch of crisis actors and it's all fake and rah, rah, rah. And then you're actually bringing down on those people who are now being harassed and, all but assaulted by Alex Jones's followers because they believe his nonsense and they go carry out there's real world consequences to his speech. So, at that point, of course, you have to curb that kind of speech because you can't be taking away other people's rights to freedom and mobility and to mourn the loss of their children. But at the same time, even the people who are harassing those Sandy Hook victims have rights too. I mean, they have a right to speak. And, this is one of the things where a German friend of mine has brought up the fact that in Germany, they have a very different freedom of speech situation because their freedom of speech laws recognize and support dignity and a human right value to that. So you can't do the same things you can do here. Their free speech is different. I think I haven't totally grasped it yet or dived into it. I'm just told, by my friend that it's, of course he's saying it's better than what goes on in the States. But when you run into this kind of issue that we're talking about with Alex Jones and the Sandy Hook thing, it highlights some weaknesses we have.
Right.
Because I have a right to speech. I have a right to move, to transport, to move my body around. So I have a right in the U.S. to go and find a parent of a Sandy Hook child and tell them what I think. I have the right to do that. But should I? Should I have the right to harass them?
Exactly.
That's where you kind of go, well, when does my right end, when I'm impinging on your rights?
Yeah.
And this becomes tricky under the way our laws are worded and our rights are laid out in the Bill of Rights, So it gets a bit rough.
Yep. Then you have to define what is harassing speech, and then that's variable depending on the person.
Exactly. What is libel? What's slander? What's a lie? Because then, of course, you're into philosophy and what's truth?
Yep.
What's truth? What's a lie? What's an opinion? What's a fact? I mean, this is where all this philosophy comes to the fore. Because when you write a law, you have to write it in a way that it's going to be universally applicable from this point forward. And you can see how bad we are at that by how many law books we have. There's volumes of these things. Laws clarifying other laws or revising laws or striking laws and making new ones, as values change. So we're not really very good at all of this.
No.
I don't think. So it's, like I said, you can see where if you really give this a little bit of thought, and you start thinking it through a little bit, it's hard sometimes when we're in the heat of the moment, very passionate about something, very riled up. It's easy to make harsh, rash calls about, taking away other people's rights.
Oh, sure.
I mean, for that reason alone, we need objective, dispassionate third-party arbiters, which is what judges are supposed to be.
Yeah.
And even the police in some fashion,
Yeah.
although that seems questionable more often than not. When the police come along, overworked, underpaid,
Sure.
every day of their life is a potential threat to their life. They might not go home every single day. I mean, in many, many ways, police are heroes just for showing up to work.
Right.
On the other hand, sometimes police are the bad guys because they show up to work and they do horrific things. So
they're human beings too, unfortunately, and
yeah,
they have buttons too.
Exactly, and foibles and problems and things they don't understand and issues they don't know how to deal with, and we rely on them for all kinds of things, So it's just rough, man. It's, it's chaos. Be kind. Anyway. The principle of universality of human rights is the cornerstone of international human rights law. This principle is first emphasized in the Universal Declaration of on Human Rights in 1948, has been reiterated in numerous international human rights conventions, declarations, and resolutions. The 1993 Vienna World Conference on Human Rights, for example, noted that it is the duty of states, and by states they're talking about nations, right? Nation states, not states of the United States. It's the duty of states to promote and protect all human rights and fundamental freedoms, regardless of their political, economic, and cultural systems. And
wow.
Yeah, exactly. So, if government did one thing and only one thing, which was that.
Yeah.
And had means and mechanisms in place to do that, that's where things get a little interesting. But just that alone, I mean, apparently we need that.
We do.
Because when we don't have it, we get barbarisms. We get cultures that don't work.
Exactly.
Or don't work as well as they should. We get, towers or pyramids of skulls. Mongolians conquering, half of Asia. And
yeah. Or even, you were talking about the Middle East earlier. There's a lot of stuff going on over there that's just really not in the realm of human rights at all. And it's, you gotta, if they want to be a part of the UN, they should be doing that. They should be protecting those rights. I do kind of agree that letting people in that aren't doing the right things is kind of messed up.
Yeah, exactly. And even getting, again, this is where the United Nations is kind of letting us down because, they have member states like Iran, Iraq, Syria, and you have this group ISIS running around in there. And like I said, I'm not going to talk about this at length. Like I said, I still have a lot of study to do. But I can certainly talk about the fact that ISIS is an extremist group that has no concept of human rights beyond their bizarre interpretation of the Quran and Muslim teachings. And they go around beheading people. They don't even follow their own rules.
Right.
And trying to even get some agreement between the member states of the United Nations as to what to do about those guys seems to be impossible. So there's just a lot of work to do on this topic. But all states, it says, according to the United Nations, all states have ratified at least one, and 80% of states have ratified 4 or more of the core human rights treaties.
Wow.
Yeah, reflecting consent of states, which creates legal obligations for them and giving concrete expression to universality. Some fundamental human rights norms enjoy universal protection by customary international law across all boundaries and civilizations. All right. Now, we were talking about this the other day. Human rights are inalienable. They should not be taken away except in specific situations and according to due process. For example, the right to liberty may be restricted if a person is found guilty of a crime by a court of law.
Right.
So it's not like we don't have laws that, restrict this stuff. It could almost, an argument can almost be made that almost all of our laws or problems with each other in social circumstances or situations are problems of where to draw the line
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
on rights,
Yeah.
you know?
Like who gets, what right, when, how.
Right. I mean, the thing about, we were talking about the death penalty. Well, that's really an argument about where does that human right to life begin and end,
Yep.
you know? And, and people have different ideas about that,
Oh, yeah.
you know? So I guess we kind of go with the majority, sort of, in a way. I don't know that we've ever had a referendum or a vote on the death penalty.
I don't know. I don't think so federally, at least, anyways. But
I don't recall ever reading or seeing anything.
yeah.
You know, any of you guys have any information on that? I'd be interested.
I'd be curious too, because I'm not sure if we've ever done anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought it might be interesting to go through. There is this thing called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was put together, or at least endorsed by, and brought to the UN after World War II by Eleanor Roosevelt. She was a big proponent on this. And it's got a lot of, I guess there's 27 articles. And here is another example. Well, when we're going through these, I think some of you guys are going to see pretty fast where even here in the United States, we do not have a recognition of universal human rights here in the States. Right? There are universal human rights that are recognized in other parts of the world that we do not recognize as human rights. I was pretty interested. I was pretty surprised and fascinated by that, because we tout ourselves as not only the world police, but the leaders in the charge for human rights.
Yeah, that we're the freest.
Yeah, and in many ways, we are the freest. But I think some of those freedoms have come at a cost, and maybe we should reevaluate a little bit where some of our priorities are at, maybe, or where some of our values lie. You know. Okay, Articles 1 and 2, for example, established the basic concepts of dignity, liberty, equality, and brotherhood. Now, that dignity point, for example. You know?
How do you define that,
Right, and how do you put it into law?
Yeah.
You know, that thing I mentioned with Germany and freedom of speech in Germany does not allow you... from what I've gathered, I kind of get the idea that our concepts of libel and slander have been already integrated into their statement of what freedom of speech means. So you cannot just go, on the street or in the media or anywhere. You can't just go start calling somebody names.
Right.
And basically scratching at or trying to claw at or trying to take away their dignity. Right? People have a right to that. And that's established by this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That's not something we have established in the United States as a right. We have the right to, in fact, a lot of our speech does tear at other people's dignity, and people, from an international community watching this or listening to this can chime in on that from different areas of the world. I'm actually extremely curious about how this plays out in other parts of the world, because I've come to find, contrary to my upbringing, that maybe the United States doesn't have it right on everything.
Exactly.
I don't like tearing down the U.S. or ragging on the U.S., but, at the same time, when something's wrong, something's wrong.
Exactly.
And if we can improve on it, make it better, then we should take the opportunity to do so.
Right.
We don't have to just catcall.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's it's not perfect, and that's okay. We want to fix the things that aren't perfect, but we don't have to throw everything out. And
yeah, exactly. I'm curious. I mean, how do you think we might fix some of this business in terms of dignity, liberty, equality, and brotherhood?
That's a hard one, because I always think, how far do you go? Because, for instance, we right now in this country, we have a big debate of how far can you go with the dignity of LGBTQ people, like how far, is it okay to say this or that or the other thing about them, what's protected, what's not protected, and that kind of thing. Like, you should be able to walk down the street without being harassed, sure. But at the same time, we do have free speech, so is it really, if someone screams out the window, hey, you tranny, is that protected speech, or is that ruining someone's dignity?
Exactly. That's exactly the kind of thing that, depending on which side of that conversation you're on, it can be kind of difficult, because at the same time, you don't want to create a situation where somebody says, I'm offended, and then they're able to shut you down because you're saying something that's true and real and needs to be said. Not name calling. I'm talking about real stuff, right? Stuff that matters. Yeah. But now you're going to get shut down because you're offending, quote unquote. There's my with the air quotes again. Offending someone, right? So, and that's become kind of a thing here in the U.S. that we deride people for offending other people. Yeah. But, as far as that kind of thing goes, you kind of, it's pretty easy for me at least to go to the side of, fuck your feelings. I want facts,
right, exactly.
to be blunt.
Or like with jokes, it's kind of hard for me because I really enjoy humor, and I enjoy dark, morbid humor, and it's like, that scares me when people are like, well, that offends me. It's like, well, but it's still kind of funny.
Well, exactly.
Like, just because it offends you doesn't mean it's wrong.
Exactly. Because the fact of the matter is that the role of a comedian or a joker in society is actually kind of important.
Mm-hmm. Very important.
And this has actually come to the fore fairly recently with all this offense and this idea of going back in your 10 years in your Twitter feed and finding every single objectionable thing you ever said. I mean, our values change over time.
Right. And James Gunn may have had different values back then. He may have just thought he was being funny. I mean, not saying that what he said was too great, but still, it's just like, that was something he did 10 years ago, probably not thinking too much about it. He's not actually doing those things, so,
That's right.
That's his...
Well, this is sort of a microcosm example of a macro situation that I think we, in our culture here in the United States at least, kind of go a little crazy with. And I think this is going on in the UK also. I couldn't speak to other countries, but I know that there's this trend or idea that, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, during any of those decades, you could look through the comedy or the values of the society at that time and see certain values reflected. Mm-hmm. Cultures evolve, they change. Maybe they evolve for the better, maybe they evolve for the worse. It's kind of hard to say until you have enough perspective, and
that's totally subjective too.
Yeah, exactly. But, you get some, you get a little distance from things and you can kind of look at them with some time and some distance, and you can kind of evaluate whether that was the right or the wrong move, against, what's going on now. But my point is that these things change and evolve. What we find funny changes, what we find bad changes. How we treat each other changes. Our dress, our music, everything changes from one generation to the next, and even within our generations. So the micro situation I was talking about here is where we take today's values and we start applying them in a punitive way to someone who's still around right now, who said and did things that were at that time within the value system.
Right.
I mean, they were funny then. People then found that funny.
Yeah.
Now we don't, because we've become more hyper aware of maybe a minority group or some other thing happens. 9/11 happens, and suddenly, there were jokes that were okay on September 10th that were not okay on September 12th.
Right.
Right? Because things changed. So when those things happen, I think it's very important that we understand where we've been so we can understand why we came to where we're at, and not hold people's feet to the fire for stuff they did 10, 20 years ago if they've actually changed too.
Right. Exactly. Like, I don't want to say who exactly, but I have older relatives that used to be, I wouldn't say like fully anti-gay, but not understanding it and having really bad kind of negative connotations towards them and everything like that, and just negative feelings about them and not understanding it, and, you know, some prejudice. And then, you know, it's 20 years later and they're fine. They have friends that are gay. They get it, you know?
Exactly.
So it's just like, people change, and that's okay. You can't hold something that they did 30 years ago against them if they've evolved. If they haven't evolved, that's a whole other story.
Well, then we have a whole nother matter, right? Because, okay, and I'll throw myself out on the sacrificial altar here. I was, as a Scientologist and as a Sea Org member, for those of you who know about my past, my oh-so-checkered past, I was incredibly homophobic. Mm-hmm. There is no other word for what I was. Absolutely. I was absolutely in fear of homosexuality, of gays, lesbians, the whole spectrum. I felt that way because I was indoctrinated to feel that way by the words and writings and lectures of L. Ron Hubbard and the culture of Scientology. If I'd been on Twitter, if Twitter had been around, if I'd been on Facebook when it first came around, I would have been posting anti-LGBT messaging. Without question, I would have been doing that. And I would have done so proudly, knowing full well that I was absolutely right in what I was saying. However, within months of coming out of Scientology and realizing what a pile of horseshit it was, I tackled that subject straight on. And George Takei was actually a thought leader for me because I'm a geek and I love Star Trek. And I was listening to what George Takei had to say. And he had to say some very intelligent things about intolerance towards the LGBTQ community. And when I saw what he had to say, I changed my mind, and I changed it drastically. I mean, I went all the way around, 180 degrees. And not 360 degrees, 180 degrees. And I now do not harbor ill will, bad feelings, hatred, or fear towards anybody in the LGBTQ community. So if I don't have tweets or Facebook posts from those days to pull back and throw against me. But if I did, I would think it would be kind of disingenuous to try to, you know, take me down or invalidate what I'm saying now or some position that I have because of how I used to be.
Right.
You know, I actually thought it was so twisted that I actually thought that I was supporting human rights by being that way, by being homophobic. So, I mean, that's how twisted it was. So now I've come to change my mind, and I agree with the way society has evolved, and I have evolved too. Yeah. So, you know, that's why I kind of go, well, if a person's changed and they're no longer, you know, full of bile and hatred and you know, misogyny or transphobia or homophobia or whatever, why would we feel the need to drag that up from 10, 20 years ago and do that? Yeah. You know? So my point with all of that was that on a microcosm level, we see people's feet being held to the fire for things that happened in the past. When they've changed, society has changed. And that's why, you know, we need to be so clever and smart about how we apply our laws and our agreements and our guidelines about rights, you know, and about dignity and about, you know, equality. I'm just going to go through the rest of these here because I want to cover the rest of these human rights points. Articles 3 through 11 of, again, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights established other individual rights, such as the right to life and the prohibition of slavery. Now, that's a you know, I don't think we do so well with that here in the United States in terms of how we have human trafficking issues,
Right.
we have the sex trade, we have child labor,
Right.
child marriage.
Ugh, yeah.
I mean, ugh. I just saw some article about some guy marrying a 12-year-old or something this morning. I was like, what? Like, literally, this kind of crap still goes on,
Yeah.
But also, of course, we need this to extend internationally, because when you have, the kind of labor practices that go on in Southeast Asian countries,
Yeah.
or China, kind of go, ugh.
Oh, totally.
Articles 6 through 11 refer to the fundamental legality of human rights, with specific remedies cited for the defense when violated. Articles 12 through 17 establish the rights of the individual towards the community, including such things as freedom of movement. That's an important one. I mean, literally being able to travel.
Yeah.
Some of these things you wouldn't think about. We really don't think about them very much, Right to talk, or right to speech, we talk about all the time, but right to movement, that's not in our Bill of Rights.
Well, and that raises a lot of questions, like, what do they mean by movement? Just travel, or do they mean being able to take up citizenship in a country other than the one you were born in? Like, what is it?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the right to travel, the right to movement is unrestricted movement.
Yeah.
Being able to go where you want to go. Now, obviously, that's not going to apply to, like all of these rights, there are regulations. You have freedom of movement to go to Washington, D.C., but that doesn't mean they're going to let you into the Pentagon.
Right, exactly.
But but free travel in and out of your own country should certainly be a right.
Oh, yeah.
And again, these rights get restricted or prohibited when you are, say, a criminal,
Right.
convicted criminal, or there's a charge against you and it's being sorted out in a court of law. So then you are restricted to, you don't leave the city, don't leave the state, that sort of thing.
Right.
But generally speaking, it should be everyone's right to go where they want to go. And it's kind of one of those things where if you don't say it out loud and you just sort of imply it or assume it, then you get, some states and bad actors that take those rights away. And then suddenly, it's not so great. Articles 18 through 21 sanction the so-called quote-unquote constitutional liberties, and with spiritual, public, and political freedoms such as freedom of thought, opinion, religion, and conscience, word, and peaceful association of the individual. So I think those articles really hone in on a lot of the things we tend to talk about or focus on. Freedom of thought. That's an important one, and we actually have a couple more proposed ones later on because of the way technology has been moving forward.
Yeah.
Freedom of thought is absolutely vital. Freedom of opinion, of course. And those are expressed through speech. Those are expressed through religion. Those are expressed through the way we associate with one another.
Right.
So stating those clearly is necessary. Articles 22 through 27 sanction an individual's economic, social, and cultural rights, including health care. Oh my God, I just said it out loud. This was actually pretty interesting because when this was, when the PSAs were being put together for Scientology's educative things on these articles, Social Security was one of the points, I believe, right? The idea that you would, have a right to be, I don't want to say taken care of, but that's kind of the idea.
Right.
But it's really, with Social Security, you're investing in your own future, and then the government assists you, and that's a great thing, I think.
Oh yeah.
But healthcare. Now, I actually pulled this one out because, okay, first off, there is a thing called Article 25. That is one of these articles, and it's specifically on this business of health. This is a right the United States does not recognize. And it says, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services, end quote. It says here, it also makes additional accommodations for security in case of physical debilitation or disability. and make special mention of care given to those in motherhood or childhood. Right? And this is where we really lose the plot in the United States.
Yes.
And I mean, we've been feeling that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I don't need to get into all of our personal details here, but we've definitely been experiencing some issues. And when you start looking at life from the halfway point,
Yeah.
you know, you start reevaluating a lot of things. Age does matter. Life experience matters to, you know, one's view of things.
Sure.
You know, and the need for Social Security, for medical care. I mean, these things start becoming more important. When I was 28 years old, I didn't give a shit about my health. You know, I would pound down the burgers and the Cokes and the chips all night long. And I literally had a pile of stuff I would eat. I mean, it was amazing that I'm still alive in some cases. But I didn't really think about my health care. I was young. It was vital. I could, you know, stay up all night for 5 nights in a row. And I, you know, didn't feel so great, but I was capable of doing it. I know at this point I'd die if I tried to do that. I'd just die. I'd just fall over and be dead. That'd be it. I'd be game over for Chris Shelton. But healthcare is, you know, this is something that is not just recognized as a social necessity in other countries. It's a right. And if you think about that, it would change the entire structure of the United States if we recognize that as a human right.
Oh, yeah.
And there's only a few people right now on the left who are proposing that that should be the way it is.
Yeah.
You know, there are some new politicians coming up the line, not just that one woman, but others.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
who are coming up and saying, no, this should be a right.
Right.
Healthcare.
Right.
And I actually agree with that.
I do too. I mean, obviously, I have not, since I was very young, had the luxury of not caring about healthcare. So it's always been a big issue for me ever since I was 18. And, you know, I'm old enough to where they didn't have the stay on your parents' insurance stuff. So, you know, I've struggled in and out of health insurance, in and out of coverage, and having to ration medicine. I've had to, you know, my dad's also diabetic. We've had to share strips, you know, and things like that when times were tough. So it's just like, yeah, it's ridiculous. No one should have to do that. No one should have to ration their medicine. No one should have to share, you know. We should all be able to take care of ourselves and be healthy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just from a point of view of humanity. And I know it's hard. You know, it's not like there's just easy, simple solutions to all of this by any stretch. I mean, especially in the United States, we have this sort of weird morphing of capitalism and socialism and Social Security and corporations and the VA, and hence there's some health insurance, but it's, you know, it's crazy and tricky and weird. And our health system is, man, you know, it's like Trump said, and who knew it was so complicated? Well, kind of all of us.
Everybody?
Yeah. We all kind of knew. But it's probably one of the single greatest challenges that this country faces is, and I think one of the fundamental reasons why it's so challenging is because we do not have a broad agreement amongst Americans that healthcare is even a right.
Right.
And I really think we need to strip it down to those kind of essential conversations before we're going to talk about the specifics of how to implement the ACA or whether it should even exist. That, you know, do we even agree that healthcare is important? Do we even agree that it's a human right? Do we even agree that people should get some assistance in this regard? You know?
Yeah.
I mean, what are the things that we agree on here? I mean, we're a big population, a huge melting pot. One of the consequences of being a melting pot is tons of different values thrown into this thing, which other countries don't necessarily have to deal with or haven't until fairly recently with all the immigration and refugees and asylum statuses and everything. Now other countries are starting to get a little bit of an idea of what's the word? Homogeneity, you know, all this mixing of cultures and races and peoples. it's rough. It makes it very, very challenging. I think that this is, I think these are questions that are going to have to be dealt with, because things are going, I don't think we're on the brink of any kind of revolution. I don't think we're in that kind of a situation right now. I think there's always troublesome times, and there's always things to be upset about. But this issue of healthcare is pretty front and center for the United States right now. And we really do need to deal with this. And I really hope that we deal with it in a sane and rational way, by recognizing that, I think that it's a human right. And I think if we could come to that agreement, I think we could build on that and revise or morph our systems into something a little bit more sensible and a little bit less greedy, a little bit less profit driven, and a little bit more humane. I think that's very, very, very necessary. And I think if we don't have those conversations in a rational way, and if we don't stop screaming about it and start figuring it out, I think things are only going to get worse. And I don't want to see that, certainly not for us.
Yeah.
All right. Now, I mentioned also in the light of emerging neurotechnologies, 4 new rights were identified. Now, I don't know that these have been ratified or made official in some fashion. This is just actually from various articles and papers on the subject. But these rights were the right to cognitive liberty, the right to mental privacy, the right to mental integrity, and the right to psychological continuity. Now, these are all speaking to me as a former cult member very strongly. And if I was going to rally on any other human rights more so than, after healthcare, because healthcare is actually, to me, even more fundamental, but I would rally around these 4 rights. These are really important. People, we talk about brainwashing, or we talk about undue influence. We talk about high control groups, authoritarianism. Like these things all are words to describe somebody basically deceiving you or lying to you or abusing you in some fashion to alter your thinking or your consciousness in order to get you in a position where you're pliable and controllable, and you will do what they tell you to do, and therefore you will serve them. And in high control groups like destructive cults, you're actually becoming the leader. You are altering your personality to be this person that you are following. And that's, of course, pretty abusive behavior. We should be allowed to be ourselves. And have the right to our own thoughts and our own opinions and our own ideas. So cognitive liberty, mental privacy, mental integrity, I mean, these are, when we're talking about having technology that can literally get in your head. Not just the persuasive control techniques or coercive persuasion, I should say. Not just those techniques, which are basically words and deception and lies, but I'm talking about actual technology. Neuroscience is going in a direction of trying to read people's minds.
Right.
Or predict behavior. Whatever use you're going to put that kind of technology to, if we don't first ensure that people have rights to not have that technology applied to them, if they don't choose to, then we're kind of moving again into authoritarianism, And here's 7 now coming into frame. Yeah, little guy. Aww. Our little cat.
What's your opinion on psychological
what do you
continuity,
think?
buddy?
What do you think about cat rights? Do you have an opinion on the matter?
He says, I have all the rights. I am the Lord.
We pretty much figure that we're here in servitude to 7, our cat. We're pretty convinced that's the case. At least we're pretty convinced he thinks that's the case. Now, we only really barely have time to get into this, but we spent so long talking about Universal Declaration of Human Rights and that subject. I thought we would have more time to get into civil rights and civil liberties. I did find it interesting that these are differentiated one from another. Civil rights concern the basic right to be free from unequal treatment based on certain protected characteristics, race, gender, disability, etc., in settings such as employment, education, housing, and access to public facilities. So that's civil rights. A civil rights violation occurs in designated situations where an individual is discriminated against on the basis of a protected characteristic. And I don't think right now, legally, across the boards, and I think certainly at a federal level, I don't think we've recognized sexual orientation as a protected class.
Yeah, I think they're still sort of fighting that out.
Yeah, I think there's local laws and statutes on the books about that. South Carolina's infamous bathroom laws and that sort of thing. But I don't think we've quite gotten there yet. And that's a civil rights battle that's still being fought. But certainly race, gender, these have been established by law. Disability, this is why we have handicap parking places, because you literally have a right to be able to access, goods and services that you need as a handicapped individual or a disabled individual, or whatever term you want to use. So we have these protected classes of groups of people, and we have rights established specifically to ensure that those protected classes of people are able to not be discriminated against because they fall into one of these classes. I can't just slap you because you're a woman, doesn't work that way, It kind of used to work that way.
It did. It
doesn't work that way now.
You used to be able to, do certain things to women at jobs because they were women.
That's right. That's exactly right. Now, civil liberties are differentiated from that because civil liberties concern basic rights and freedoms that are guaranteed, either explicitly identified in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, or interpreted or inferred through the years of legislatures or the courts. For example, civil liberties: right to free speech, right to privacy, right to remain silent in a police interrogation, right to be free from unreasonable searches of your home, the right to a fair court trial, the right to marry, the right to vote. So clearly there's a Venn diagram that exists where human rights and civil liberties and civil rights
all kind of
meet or cross in some ways. Because I know a lot of these rights under the civil liberties here are also defined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The law differentiates between civil rights, which means the basic right of freedom from discrimination based on certain personal characteristics, and civil liberties, which are basic freedoms. Civil liberties concern the actual basic freedoms. Civil rights concern the treatment of an individual regarding certain rights. So that's kind of the differentiation in terminology there. One way to consider the difference between civil rights and civil liberties is to look at, one, what right is affected, and two, whose right is affected.
Okay.
So that's how you kind of differentiate those things. So as an employee, you do not have the legal right to a promotion because a promotion is not a guaranteed civil liberty. Right? But you do have the right to be free from discrimination in getting a promotion.
Right. They can't be like, you're in a wheelchair, no promotion for you.
Exactly. So that's where these two things sort of, the rubber meets the road on civil liberties and civil rights. So anyway, I just wanted to cover that a little bit because I thought that was an important part of the conversation. We could have another podcast about civil liberties here in the United States, but that's pretty well covered territory as well. I just wanted to kind of go over some of this stuff because I thought this is stuff that really is pretty near and dear to my heart. And I think needs a lot more attention.
Oh, yeah.
This wasn't all about just healthcare, but we definitely highlighted that because I wanted to show that the United States is not necessarily the front runner in all human rights endeavors. But I also know, again, that this is a very contentious issue, and I don't pretend that it's not. I'm sure there's plenty of people watching or listening right now who are thinking, screw you, Chris Shelton, healthcare is not a right. It's a privilege, and you have to pay for it, and how dare you even think otherwise. But I'm just going to tell you, the rest of the world doesn't necessarily agree with you on that. And, you can say, well, fuck the rest of the world, but actually, no, let's not do that. Let's actually figure out something that actually benefits everybody.
Yeah, and it's actually really hard to work for your healthcare when to earn money to get your healthcare when you don't have your medicine. So
It's more than a little difficult. Some of these things are very catch-22s, on this. And the longer we kind of put this off, the worse off it's going to get. So, all right. Well, anyway, this is kind of fun.
Yeah.
So thanks for helping me out with this.
You're welcome.
Okay, guys, thanks for coming around and watching. I hope that some of this was interesting and educational and entertaining for you. Certainly, 7 was pretty entertaining, if nothing else. Leave any questions, comments, or feedback in the comment section here on YouTube below, or at sensiblyspeaking.com. And if you like my channel and like the work that we are doing here, please consider supporting through Patreon. That would be awesome and wonderful, because that's what keeps this channel going. All right, guys, talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.